The late spring day began very calm, yet warm, in Grand Island, Nebraska. For many residents of the city, it was just another Tuesday. However, as the day progressed into the late afternoon hours, the incoming nightfall felt a bit more ominous than usual. The evening sunshine grew increasingly darker and darker before sunset, as black clouds started to envelop the skies above. What was thought to have been initially a day with just a 20% risk of severe weather would begin to transform into a night of devastating tornadoes unlike ever seen before. Throughout the day, a warm front with an influx of moist Gulf of Mexico air crept into the Central Plains from southern surface level winds. This warm air mass would also bring a very high amount of atmospheric instability, with convective potential in central Nebraska skyrocketing to 4,000 joules per kilogram into the late afternoon. As the air around Grand Island had winds moving from a southeasterly trajectory at 11 miles per hour at the surface to moving from the east at 57 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, this shift in wind direction created a disastrous recipe, as this wind shear would create rotating supercells with ease. These rapidly moving winds changing direction at increasing altitudes, as well as a jet streak to the southwest in New Mexico and Texas, a shortwave trough in Colorado and Kansas inducing stronger convection as it moved northeast, and significant instability arriving from Grand Island south would eventually collide with the secret ingredient that created this disastrous tornado outbreak. A stationary front coupled with an unusually slow-moving June 3rd low-pressure system. The unstable southern air masses would collide with the stationary front, creating a behemoth 68,000-foot-tall supercell, germinating in the blackening skies by around 8 p.m. So what happened in this 3-hour time frame? Well, this happened. I don't know about you, but all I have to say is there is nothing even remotely similar to this that has ever been documented. The close concentration of these 7 tornadoes to one single city with varying degrees of strength, all the while with the most disturbingly unconventional paths, amazes me so much. What I find to be the strangest and creepiest aspect of the weird tornadoes is the way 2 of the particularly most destructive twisters perfectly follow the layout of Grand Island, or ran directly over important city streets, such as Capitol Avenue, Bismarck Road, and South Locust Street. It's almost as if these tornadoes gained some sort of demented mode of consciousness for a brief time, shifting their paths against the rules of God and man to become as destructive as possible. So what was it like experiencing the night of the twisters? Dan Runcie, a Hastings, Nebraska native, is flying westbound on a commercial airplane and looks out the window. To his north, the darkening skies loom with a threatening aura, and an absolutely behemoth and towering anvil-shaped supercell is hovering over the Grand Island area. At an altitude between 30 to 40,000 feet above the ground, this supercell towers nearly twice as tall as Dan's elevation, at an astounding 68,000 feet. Impressed, he reaches for his camera and takes a picture of one of the largest supercells ever documented. But to those on the ground some 30,000 feet below would soon experience a night they would never forget for decades to come. Blackened skies rapidly grow ominous as 6 p.m. rolls around. Another hour passes, and the formation of a giant supercell in central Nebraska surprises meteorologists at the National Weather Service in Grand Island. The explosive growth of this supercell began producing significant storms northwest of the city, prompting the National Weather Service to issue a severe thunderstorm warning at 7:45 p.m. Yet this storm would quickly grow tornadic around 8:10 p.m. and be upgraded to a tornado warning. A radar-indicated tornado was located near the small community of DANNEBROG about 13 miles west of Grand Island's city limits. At first, this twister would be taking on the statistically conventional northeastern trajectory of most tornadoes that make landfall. Then, the unthinkable happens. To the astonishment of the National Weather Service, the massive supercell thunderstorm shifts its direction south. Around 8:30 p.m., a hook echo signature was observed on radar, inching slowly towards Grand Island. Sirens across the city were sounded in response to this increasing tornado threat. Then, around 8:45 p.m., an eye resembling a hurricane forms at the center. The first confirmed tornado touches down 11 miles to the northwest of downtown. And at the same time, a weather radio goes off at the World of Hobbies and Toys at the Conestoga Mall.
The National Weather Service in Grand Island has issued a tornado warning for Hall County, Nebraska until 9:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time. At 8:45 p.m., a severe thunderstorm capable of producing a tornado was located 11 miles northwest of Grand Island, moving south-southeast at 8 miles per hour. Take cover now. Move to an interior room on the lowest floor of a sturdy building.
Denise BEHRING, who worked at the store, was told to go home early by her manager Bob Perry due to the incoming severe weather. She left the store and briefly arrived back to her house on West Capitol Avenue, but her parents weren't around. Her family were attending a birthday party for her Aunt Barbara. However, her aunt and uncle's farmstead was located northwest of Grand Island, right in the vicinity of the first tornado. Denise grabbed a doll she bought as a birthday gift for her aunt, hopped in her car, and proceeded to drive to her relative's farm. Her family had tried calling the store and her house, warning her to stay home and avoid driving into the incoming severe weather. But little did she know she would miss both phone calls and carry on with her evening. This tornado northwest of Grand Island proceeded to move south, undulating incredibly slow in the rural farmland corridor near 1R, White Cloud, and Abbott Roads, running east-west, and 60th, Monitor, and Engelman Roads running north-south. The tornado would loop around its own path and change direction an incredible 7 times, taking 14.5 miles to cover a 7-mile-long straight path with an average forward speed of only 8.5 miles per hour. No cornfield nor farmhouse in the vicinity north of Nebraska State Highway 2 were safe from being demolished by this tornado's F3 intensity and near half-mile width. The chances of being hit head-on were very high as the storm swung along the ground like a pendulum, crossing the same roads over and over again. And somewhere along these back roads, Denise BEHRING would find herself directly in the path of this massive F3. Her normal route to her aunt and uncle's house northwest of Grand Island was heading westbound on Highway 2 and then turning right onto a northbound road. But this time, Denise had decided to take a different east-west road on her way to her aunt's birthday. Unfortunately, she would not make it to the party. Denise had been caught in the tornado while heading westbound, and she had been tossed over 3/4 of a mile away from the road. Denise Behring would become the first victim of the Grand Island tornadoes that evening. Though her family didn't understand why she was found on a road she never took to the farm, it's possible that because of the dangerous weather, she could have tried avoiding the storm by taking a different road to get away. But the unpredictability of this unbelievable tornado looping over itself would put anyone in harm's way had they found themselves northwest of Grand Island. And 15 minutes after this tornado touches down, the unthinkable happens yet again. At 9 p.m., just barely south of U.S. Highway 281 by the intersection of Webb and Airport Roads, another tornado touches down. 2 tornadoes are currently on the ground by the northern fringes of Grand Island. This tornado would seemingly begin on a conventional path like all twisters in the northern hemisphere, moving away from the city towards the northeast, except this tornado was spinning in the completely opposite direction of 99% of them. Astoundingly, this Airport and Webb Road tornado would be among one of the rarest breed of tornadoes in North America, which are called anticyclonic tornadoes. This tornado appeared as a sickly growth sticking out of Tornado 1's creepy hurricane-like hook echo on radar, crawling along the ground at an astoundingly slow average speed of 4 miles per hour. Suddenly, at 9:05 p.m., the unthinkable would repeat yet again for this twisted tornado outbreak. Another twister touches down. 3 tornadoes were now on the ground at the same time in Grand Island, Nebraska. Less than a quarter mile away from the second tornado, another tornado touches the ground. And unbelievably, this tornado was also anticyclonically rotating. 2 tornadoes right next to each other in the exact same cornfield, rotating anticyclonically and heading northeast and north respectively, is about as astounding as it gets. Until suddenly, both tornadoes completely changed trajectory. Tornado 2 unexpectedly shifts its direction to the southwest, heading back towards Webb Road, and Tornado 3, rapidly intensifying in strength, shifts its northern trajectory immediately towards the south, crossing Highway 281 and cornfields north of the city. Rod Gartner, a Grand Island resident, is standing outside by Johnson Drive looking towards the north. Gartner grabs a camera and takes a picture of the 2 tornadoes standing next to each other 2.5 miles north. This would be the only confirmed photograph of the Grand Island tornadoes on the ground. After just 12 minutes, Tornado 2 returned to the skies around 9:12 p.m., having injured 5 people. Tornado 3 would continue towards the south, crossing Highway 2 and finally arriving to the heavily concentrated Capitol Avenue around 9:15. From this time until around 9:30, 2 tornadoes are impacting 2 ends of Capitol Avenue, as the Capitol Heights neighborhood west of Grand Island was finally under the gun from the first tornado around 9:10 p.m. The sounds of shrieking and humming, according to the survivors of these tornadoes, lasted for nearly 15 to 20 minutes as they ransacked their houses while taking cover in the basement. In Capitol Heights, the crawling F3 tornado and pockets of downburst winds began blowing shingles off roofs and snapping trees. Northwest High School would have numerous windows blown out, as well as significant roof damage and water damage to the school's floors and gym. To the east, the anticyclonic F3 tornado caused major damage to nearly 100 homes and flattening 8 buildings. This tornado would cause extensive damage to the Nebraska Veterans Home on Capitol Avenue, which received damage to its roof and windows, and many large trees on the premises were damaged beyond saving. The senior high school also received substantial roof damage and broken windows, as well as water damage inside the building. As this East Capitol tornado advanced, the storm shifted to the southeast, crossing North Broadwell Avenue and aiming towards the VA hospital. Most of the building's 400 windows were blown out from the winds and swirling debris. Yet the strongest tornadic winds, while sparing the hospital, were not so forgiving to other homes in its vicinity. Smaller houses took on the brunt of this F3's damaging winds, where walls would be caved in and swept aside as a standing slab of concrete remained. Continuing to the southeast, this tornado would travel directly down the middle of Grand Island's northeastern section of town, shaping its course suspiciously parallel with this neighborhood's northwest and southeast layout. Wind damage from this storm at its furthest extended out as far between Elm Street to the west, all the way towards Beale Street across the railroad tracks to its east. Trees were down all across this part of town, blocking off numerous streets from passage. At 9:30 p.m., after traveling 3.7 miles, this tornado would momentarily shift to the southwest before lifting from the ground near the intersection of 8th and Cedar Street, less than a mile from downtown Grand Island. 4 minutes later, the Capitol Heights tornado would finally diminish its longest tornado path of the Grand Island twisters, the first of which to touch down among the 3 northern Grand Island tornadoes, and the last of the triage to return to the skies. The city of Grand Island finally got a break, from tornadoes at least, as heavy downpours, blowing winds, and hail kept pounding down on the city. The brief intermission would be dismissed when another tornado at 9:46 p.m. would touch down, and this one was yet another bizarre twister just like its northern cousins. South of US Highway 34 near the intersection of Shady Bend Road, another anticyclonic tornado drops from the hideous black skies. And whether this detail or the next one is the strangest aspect of this twister, this tornado began moving to the southwest, the entirely opposite direction most tornadoes travel. This twister stirred up the rural countryside, inflicting relatively minor F1 damage. But just as the tornado nearly approached Schimmer Road to the south, the tornado completely changes its direction and shifts its trajectory to the west. But incredibly, this western trajectory would shift again, now traversing to the north, barely crossing over Stewart Road and slingshotting its way back up towards Grand Island. However, this tornado would dissipate just south of Highway 34, avoiding the highway like it was lava, and returned to the sky just 4 minutes after it came down at 9:50 p.m. This 300-foot wide tornado would be the shortest lived, shortest traveled, least destructive to property, and injured nobody, comparatively making it the least significant tornado in Grand Island on June 3rd. But it did have one conventional attribute, which was its forward speed of 34 miles per hour, comparable to most tornadoes, and a blistering pace in regards to the rest of the Grand Island twisters. Another break in the tornadoes would occur once again, this time for 26 minutes, over twice as long as the lull seen around 9:34 p.m. But the horror of the night of the twisters would soon reach its apex in just a matter of time. At 10:16 p.m., on the eastern edge of Grand Island, the wealthy Eagles Lake and Crystal Lake neighborhood became the landing strip for the most powerful tornado of June 3, 1980. This tornado began moving due west. In an instant, 50 homes in this neighborhood were pulverized, and storm reports indicated that nearly every single home was damaged. Massive cottonwood trees along these lake shores, some of the largest deciduous tree species in North America, were either snapped in half, windswept, pulverized, or a combination of all three. Moving at a relatively brisk average forward speed of 28 miles per hour, this tornado continued west, hovering directly over Bismarck Road at over a half-mile wide. Homes along this tornado path were no match for its 200-mile-per-hour winds, sweeping away entire houses and uprooting trees. Cars would be overturned and tossed around, where reports of flying vehicles were sent in to the National Weather Service. An F4 tornado was on the ground, one of the most powerful storms on planet Earth. Meaves Bowl, a popular bowling alley in Grand Island, was very busy on June 3rd. Many patrons were enjoying their late Tuesday evening with a few rounds of bowling. But something was very wrong. A person runs into the bowling alley and yells for everyone to take cover. But most people continue bowling, not taking heed to the warning as a massive tornado nearly a mile wide was slamming down Bismarck Road. The owner of Meaves Bowl, who was aware of the threatening storm approaching, shuts off the power to the lanes and wrangles everyone into the bathrooms. An explosion of swirling debris and devastation to the bowling alley begins, ripping the massive building into bits. Incredibly, all lives were spared, but the tornado would shift southwesterly, decimating neighborhoods between East Bismarck and East Fauner Park roads. Soon, one of the most major streets in Grand Island, Nebraska, would see some of the worst devastation inflicted on the night of the twisters. South Locust Street, also known as the Strip to many locals, was under direct attack from this terrible twister. Restaurants, stores, and residential areas were no match for the F4 strength bestowed upon them. And tragically, 4 more Grand Islanders would lose their lives as the tornado shifted its direction down the middle of this busy city street. The Pagoda Lounge, another staple of the city, was in the direct path of this trajectory shift. As the roar of the storm approached, the building began to tremble under the strength of the winds, and the roof would soon give way. The 15 to 16 people inside the lounge would take cover underneath a piano bar while the roof fell around them. But one man, Rodney Lease, would not survive, as he would be found in the rubble of the destroyed building. Tipton Trailer Court along South Locust Street became another major target by the impending tornado. Robin Larson and her fiancé Randy Stout knew a horrendous storm was approaching and wrapped themselves in a mattress right before the twister arrived. But the powerful winds were too immense, and both were tossed over half a block away when the tornado destroyed their trailer. Randy, though not seriously injured, was found in the rubble of the Dairy Queen on the southwest corner of Stolly Park Road and South Locust Street and was hospitalized. But Robin was still missing. It would not be until around 4 p.m. the following day that her body would be discovered. She was just 17 years old, the youngest victim of the Grand Island twisters. This tornado would shift its direction yet again towards the southeast before reaching the tail end of its 6-mile path. 2 more Grand Islanders would become the last 2 victims of the night of the twisters, as the F4 continued its hideously abnormal trajectory. Charles Peterson and his wife Hattie, who lived on 3100 South Locust, had been watching the storm throughout the course of the evening. Peterson thought these twisters would steer clear of their home, but then the South Locust tornado was heading straight at them. Knowing this, Peterson yells for his wife to leave the living room and brace for impact. Charles chooses a bedroom wall to take cover next to, and Hattie seeks shelter in a bathroom. The tornado devastates the Peterson home. Just 4 feet away from each other, Hattie would survive the tornado, but Charles lost his life and was found under the rubble. Danny Davenport and his fiancée Christy Swanson had gone out to dinner for the evening, but the two had found themselves on South Locust Street directly in harm's way from the tornado. Davenport quickly chose to drive to the Regal 8 Motel, where he and Swanson would take shelter under the building's front canopy. As the F4 tornadic winds were assaulting the strip, the 6'7" Davenport covered his fiancée with his body, protecting her from the immense debris swirling around them. Danny would be hit in the back of the head with a beam, promptly being hospitalized. Tragically, he would not recover from his life-threatening injuries and would pass away 3 days later, becoming the 5th and final victim of these heinous tornadoes. After crossing US Highway 34, before lifting in cornfields between South Locust Street and Stewart Roads, the F4 shifted for the last time towards the east, ending among the most terrible 12 minutes of destruction Grand Island would endure. Even though the worst had passed by, it still wasn't over for the rural Hall and Hamilton County farming corridors southeast of Grand Island between US 34 and Interstate 80, as 2 more tornadoes would touch down on June 3rd. During the tail end of the South Locust's terrible destruction, another tornado would touch down very close to where Tornado 4 dropped from the skies, east of Shady Bend Road and north of Highway 34. And this tornado was still cut from the exact same bizarre cloth as the others, starting on a southwest trajectory towards Highway 34 and cutting across a cornfield until reaching Stewart Road. Upon meeting this road, it would bend its direction, heading due south on top of this road, and then turning towards the southeast. One of the most bizarre aspects with Tornado 6 is that it seemed to mirror Tornado 4's path at various times, and for some very peculiar reason, they did not want to cross very far to the west of Stewart Road, treating it like some strange western boundary. This tornado would continue southeast, crossing Schimmer Road, and eventually turning towards due east, until it would eventually lift about a mile southwest of the US 34 bridge around 10:35 p.m., having injured 18 people along its path. But there was still one more tornado in store for the evening near Grand Island, and in true Night of the Twisters form, this tornado would go out with a literal twist. Touching down around 10:45 p.m., this tornado developed in Hamilton County just east of the Highway 34 bridge, crossing the Platte River, and took on a slight southeastern trajectory. And to no surprise at this point, this F1 tornado, much like its earlier Capitol Heights cousin, would loop around in circles several times like a pig's tail through rural farmland south of Highway 34. The distance the tornado traveled in 4.1 miles took a whopping 13.4 miles thanks to looping over its own path multiple times. all the while moving at just 5.5 miles per hour. 2 people would be injured in this tornado, but thankfully, numerous homes were spared as the tornado would pass through very rural farmland. After being on the ground for 45 minutes, Tornado 7 would finally dissipate around 11:30 p.m. This final tornado warning would reduce into severe thunderstorm and flash flood warnings for the rest of the night. The night of the Twisters was over, but its lasting impact had only just begun. Black Tuesday finally ended deep into the early morning hours of June 4th as the storms dwindled off. For 10% of Grand Island, the night ended when the last bit of tornado TV coverage signed off at 3:30 a.m. But for the rest of the 90% of Grand Islanders, whose power had been cut off, as well as 3 substations disabled, the sunshine rose to find the city in complete ruin. A war zone would be the closest description to some neighborhoods, while Armageddon would be better suited to others. But the scale of destruction can't really be talked about unless someone were actually there. And to those who weren't, like myself, the closest thing to truly witnessing this disastrous storm is this magazine. This is the quintessential artifact to experience the night of the Twisters. Published later in 1980, Tornado magazine features 64 pages of sheer destruction these tornadoes caused in Grand Island, featuring newspaper articles and pictures of the battered neighborhoods and rural farmlands altogether. The aerial photographs demonstrate the drastic devastation from these late-night Twisters, as the estimated damages range from a conservative $80 million all the way up to a staggering $300 million, or a whopping $310 million to $1.1 billion adjusted for inflation and counting today. 5 people lost their lives from these horrible tornadoes, as well as hundreds of people injured, and thousands more homeless from the hundreds of homes being swept away or condemned from the damage. Around 62 Grand Island businesses across the city faced minor damage all the way up to complete obliteration. But apart from still images of the destruction, the upcoming weeks and months after the tornadoes were arduous for Grand Islanders. Very hot and humid days were in store as late spring crept into the summer, with 2 to 3 inches of rain having fell from the massive storm complex. The moisture attracted mosquitoes to the area, prompting the city to spray often to keep the bugs down. 90% of the city's power was cut off, causing city utilities such as wastewater facilities to stop working. Grand Island's drinking water would become contaminated with sewage, prompting residents to drink bottled water or soda as a replacement. Water rations were put in place, where city officials prompted residents to limit water usage until utilities were back up. Fires broke out underground as gas lines blew up, prompting firefighters to put out these fires all over the city. Several 100,000 tons of rubble and debris would be collected from the destruction in Grand Island and placed in 6 various dumping sites around the area and burned, taking weeks to move around. Despite the burdening task of cleaning up, Grand Islanders excelled in getting their city back in shape again. FEMA trailers would be brought in to provide housing for hundreds of displaced citizens without a home. Federal and state funding would be offered to the residents, even though there was a notable lack of these programs being utilized due to many being overwhelmed or uninformed on applying for them. The tenacity and even a bit of sense of humor to clean up their city alone helped to rebuild Nebraska's former third city once again. As the phrases graffitied on destroyed houses and silly quips placed on former business signage would carry with it a necessity to keep spirits up as everyone coped with such tremendous loss altogether. As such, President Jimmy Carter arrived to Grand Island on June 10th to inspect the damage firsthand in the heavily battered neighborhoods and spoke before the city, helping to raise the spirits of the shocked residents. Aside from some citizens not being too happy with Carter's visit, to many others, it helped boost confidence in recovering their city once again. Within the upcoming years, Grand Island would rebuild and continue to grow as the 33,000 residents increased to over 50,000 people as of today, earning them back-to-back All-America City Awards in 1981 and 1982 for their robust work ethic. After just 3 hours and one night completely changed everything. Even though the true experts of these tornadoes were those who were there on June 3rd to endure them, the sheer bizarreness of the Night of the Twisters should not be slept on. If a book and a movie were made about this night, as well as expert meteorologist Dr. Ted Fujita himself said he never saw anything like this tornadic event in his decades of studying them. As the city of Grand Island was met with the most arduous task of cleaning up their destroyed homes and livelihoods, Fujita as well as Dr. Roger Wakimoto, both meteorological experts from the University of Chicago, tasked themselves with mapping the tornado tracks of the 7 twisters on June 3rd. This, according to fellow tornado expert Thomas Grzoulis, was quite possibly one of the most difficult and elaborate tornado mapping attempts ever performed. Incredibly, according to Don Davis, who monitored the radar at the Grand Island National Weather Service, the possibility for this insane tornadic event occurred twice, 3 years prior to 1980. These southeastern core storms form in late spring and germinate around Broken Bow, moving in a southeastern course thanks to high-pressure ridges extending from the Rocky Mountains to the Great Plains. And in May 1977, 12 tornadoes formed from a storm system that moved southeast from Bolus towards Doniphan, damaging treetops and farms in their path. Another storm system in September 1977 would also move southeast, affecting areas between Ravenna down towards Hastings. These prototypical storms would miss Grand Island thanks to being a bit too far west of the city, as Don Davis would state that the May 1977 storms would have hit Grand Island if the low-pressure system driving them had moved east just 3 miles. Even though these types of storms, according to Davis, were not too unusual for the surrounding area around Grand Island, the intense strength of the storms on June 3rd compared to 3 years prior, as well as their slow movement and anticyclonic tornadoes, would certainly demonstrate the bizarre nature of this storm system. Just days after the tornadoes, there were some initial conflicting theories as to how many tornadoes were actually present that night. Wakimoto, before him and Fujita finalized the official Grand Island tornado map, thought there were at least 3 main tornadoes, which were the Capitol Heights, Capitol Avenue, and South Locust tornadoes. However, Don Davis and John Tare, another Grand Island National Weather Service meteorologist, thought there were numerous funnels, potentially upwards of nearly 15 tornadoes. Tare, who lived at Hidden Lake, thought at least 5 funnels were present above this area alone, where he saw a funnel cloud to the northwest and his neighbor saw 2 white funnels above him. He thought 2 more funnels also came from the east and then converged with the other 3, forming the hideous Bismarck Road and South Locust Street tornado. Despite the current agreement of 7 tornadoes having touched down in Grand Island, it's possible there were many more funnel clouds which never made landfall that were observed. There was even a strange theory that the recent eruption of Mount St. Helens just 2 weeks prior on May 18th somehow played a role in the severity of the Grand Island tornadoes. But Arthur Douglas, a University of Nebraska professor, dispelled this notion, believing that Pacific Ocean temperatures, as well as suddenly shifting weather patterns from dry to wet conditions between spring and summer, had influenced the turbulence for Central Plains weather, as well as the very grim and tragic Night of the Twisters. The Nebraska Tourism Commission officially changed their slogan to Nebraska, honestly, it's not for everyone, which replaced Nebraska, the Good Life in 2019. However, this slogan was met with criticism from Nebraskans, who perceived it as mocking and too self-deprecating in tone, including Governor Jim Pillen. But as a Wisconsinite, I often find this slogan remains true, because as someone who actually loves the state of Nebraska, mentioning this to fellow Wisconsinites that I enjoyed my visits to the Husker State is met with strange looks and even staunch disagreement. The night of the Twisters alone made me want to drive 8 hours deep into the Great Plains to visit a city that Interstate 80 didn't even bother to come within 4 miles away from. A city that many outsiders may not have even batted an eye towards, considering just 3 off-ramps take you into town, and the lengthy South Locust exit really shows how astonishingly far away the interstate truly is from Nebraska's now 4th largest city. The Night of the Twisters is my very favorite tornadic event to study. Seeing Ted Fujita's map of the Grand Island tornadoes for some reason made me incredibly interested in this event, and prompted me to explore the neighborhoods that these horrible twisters ravaged 45 years ago and counting. If you are fascinated by tornadoes, you have to visit Grand Island and retrace the steps of these twisters yourself. Another crucial stop in town is Tornado Hill, which is located at Ryder Park. As the city was dealing with cleaning up hundreds of thousands of tons of debris from the twisters, Grand Island was running out of room to dispose of it in the various dump sites nearby. City officials quickly had to find another place to take some of this debris, and out of necessity, Ryder Park became a dump site. The hill at the park was dug open, where debris had been placed inside of it, and then buried under 4 feet of dirt. This greatly increased the size of the Ryder Park Hill, and became a bittersweet reminder of the trauma Grand Island faced. A piece of something that everyone lost on June 3rd is buried underneath the soil here, and now remains a place Grand Islanders can remember that terrible night and their growth from the devastation together. Thank you all for watching my video on the Night of the Twisters. This is my very favorite tornado story of all time, and I cherished my time visiting Grand Island to get footage of the city to retrace the steps of the twisters on the ground. I'd like to personally thank Sarah, who reached out to me and gave me her copy of Tornado Magazine, as well as a copy of the Omaha World Herald from June 11th, 1980, to use as research for this video. The Edith Abbott Memorial Library in Grand Island was a fantastic resource, as well as considering they have 2 massive scrapbooks filled with newspaper articles and pictures from shortly after the tornado swept through. Maybe Nebraska isn't for everyone, but its friendly people, rolling sandhills, gigantic cottonwood trees, endless rivers, Runza restaurants, and one of the most unbelievably strange tornado events ever recorded definitely made it for me. And if you are fascinated by tornadoes, maybe exploring the city of the Night of the Twisters can make it for you too.